You are now joining Children of the Watch.
That's right. It's the number one podcast in the galaxy for all things The Mandalorian. I'm your host, Alex Maxwell, and joining me as always is
Mac Lacey. Alex, we're back with our second weekly breakdown for season 3 of The Mandalorian. What an amazing episode chapter 18 was. There is so much we're going to have to talk about.
You have no idea how much we have to talk about on this episode. I mean, I could not believe that we went straight to the Mines of Mandalore in the second episode of this season. And that makes you wonder, what do we have lined up for the rest of this season?
Exactly. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I figured was going to be upcoming, that we might get to later in the season, we just did in the second episode of season 3. Yeah, it could really go anywhere from here.
It really could. And I lost my mind in this episode. Like, I could not believe some of the things that we were seeing, some of the Mandalorian lore that was added to the vernacular that we know. And it's actually, there's some things that might have been slightly changed, not in a big way, but like what we thought we knew was changed. And so like, we didn't actually know it. We had good educated guesses, and now we actually know some things that we can start adding to our Mandalorian lexicon. So there's a lot of things that we can break down in terms of lore-wise. I mean, what a great episode this was. Let's just kind of get into our general thoughts and feelings right now. Is that good with you? Is there any business that we need to take care of, Mac?
I mean, just the usuals. Check us out on, Twitter and Instagram, COT Watch.
Yeah.
Definitely, check out our Patreon page. Yeah. Check out keepthewatch.com for merch and that kind of stuff.
A great way that if you can't support us on Patreon, probably the best way to support us is leaving a review over on Apple Podcast or Spotify and rating a review in the podcast and letting people know about the podcast. I think that's the best way you can actually help the podcast if you enjoy it. So we're almost to 1,800 reviews on Apple Podcasts. We're about 20 away. So we did a really good job this past week, but we're 20 away. I'd love to get there before chapter 19 of The Mandalorian. I think we can do it. But let's jump into just our general thoughts and feelings before we do the official scene-by-scene breakdown. And if you're new with us, we do scene-by-scene breakdowns here, but we don't want to miss anything, right? Like we don't want to skip anything because sometimes people can go on rabbit trails. Well, I mean, we're going to stick to everything that happened because there's some clues hidden out throughout these episodes that we got to talk about that might not seem like a big deal on the surface, but they're a really big deal. And then we'd love to hear you guys call in to our voicemail hotline, 205-259-6675. We've got a ton of calls already, and I can't wait for that episode later this week. But Mac, how do you feel about the episode?
Man, I feel pretty good. I love that we kind of in this installment wrapped up the setup. I feel like we needed to get out of the chapter 17, the first episode of this season, did a really, really, really good job of kind of giving us the necessary a great starting point to jump off of for the season. This episode kind of wrapped that stuff up and then got us right into the action we kind of have now set off on our adventure, I feel like.
Yeah, it was like half set up, then like the rest of it's like, okay, here we're really now in season 3, like what the crux of it's going to be. And I was kind of shocked that, like I said at the opening of the podcast, that we're doing this right now.
Yeah.
Now, you got to keep in mind, we had 2 setup episodes in the Book of Boba Fett for this as well. So it's really kind of like the 4th episode where this is happening. And it's culminating right here. But like, it's just incredible to see because it gets me really excited for what's to come,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we kind of went back and forth on when we thought the Mines of Mandalore were gonna fall. I definitely this is earlier than I've been thinking recently. So yeah, it's exciting. We got, I mean, and just like we set up top as well, the the Mandalorian lore and everything that we got in this episode. We're really filling in some gaps, and we're gonna get to all those little Easter eggs and making those connections as we continue the breakdown. But
we've got to do some speculating too on whatever that mech droid humanoid thing was, because that was something. So I'm really excited to talk about that. I'm gonna give you a little history lesson on Boonta Eve. And so you can understand what that is. But it was a great episode. I can't wait to break it down. Are you ready to break it down, Matt?
I think we probably just need to jump into it.
Let's do it. All right, so Chapter 18, The Mines of Mandalore. The director was Rachel Morrison. She's a newcomer to The Mandalorian, but you might recognize her name. She was the cinematographer on Black Panther, and I thought she did a fantastic job on this episode. Her style fit right in with The Mandalorian. It felt seamless to me. There was nothing about it that's like, oh, that's way different than The Mandalorian. No, it felt true to The Mandalorian. So I thought she did a fantastic job.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's important when you're doing a TV show. Like films are, kind of all about making the director's individual style and choices stand out. And TV's sort of the opposite, unless it's one director doing the whole thing, which we do not have, in this case. But yeah, I thought everything felt consistent. It felt super Star Wars. It actually, to me, overall had a really similar tone and pace to A New Hope. It took its time and it left a little more space in some areas where maybe there wasn't a lot of dialogue happening.
Sure.
We used like some wipe transitions and stuff like that just screams New Hope to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, like as far as direction, I think it was a home run.
Right. And then of course the writer was Jon Favreau. So let's jump into this. We begin this episode with seeing Sundari, the capital city of Mandalore, exploding in the flashback from the Book of Boba Fett. And we're reminded of Din's mission to bathe in the living waters, and the armor mentioning the mythosaur rising up to herald a new age of Mandalore. So as soon as that started to pop up, I was like, oh, dang, we're doing this.
Yeah, this is your your semi-annual reminder to watch the recap portions of before an episode of The Mandalorian, because they generally really pointedly put stuff in front of you that you need to know kind of going, to be focused on going into the episode.
Yep.
I always feel like watching the recaps, even if you've, watched every single episode up until this point, it puts you in that mindset to receive whatever message they're about to give you.
It sets the expectations for the episodes, right? Like, it's just like, okay, that's what we're doing. And so we are also reminded about Bo-Katan and her family legacy in that recap. So, okay, we're probably going to get Bo-Katan in this episode, and boy, did we.
In a big way.
Yeah. Man, that was one of the best Bo-Katan things I've ever seen in my entire life. After the Lucasfilm logo and the helmets, we immediately open up on Mos Eisley Tatooine as two speeders race in the streets. Fireworks are popping off in the sky as the speeders zoom around Hangar 35. And inside the hangar, a Rodian meets with Peli Motto about his speeder. And she mentions how many parts are missing on it. It's going to be a really hard fix. It'll take a long time to fix, but she thinks that maybe she can do it. She's doing her whole thing. And Peli tells the Rodian that she needs to put half up front and that she would charge him more she should charge him more because it's Boonta Eve. Now, if you think you've heard of that term before, you have. It's from episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Anakin Skywalker raced his pod racer in the Boonta Eve Classic. Okay, but what is Boonta Eve? This is basically like Tatooine's Christmas, it seems like.
Yeah, or Life Day, as it
were.
Or
Life Day. So here is the official explanation of Boonta Eve. It honored the rise of Boonta Hastilic Shadru to godhood. Now, who's Boonta? Exactly. Who's Boonta? Well, he was a Hutt that the people of Tatooine, and probably all Hutts, believe ascended and became a god.
Yeah, and that's a super interesting idea, just because the Hutts kind of have this yeah, they're gangsters, but they're more like feudal lords to me, right?
Yes.
It's kind of the whole shogun thing.
Yeah.
And kind of fitting with that sort of idea, like you've got a god emperor, like a mortal being who was so great that they ascended to godhood. So it's a really cool kind of cultural thing to flesh out.
And in the expanded universe, the Hutts actually used to control most of the galaxy, like before the Republic. So I wonder if this is like in any way connected to that time period when the Hutts really, really ruled and were a big threat. I don't know, but I thought that was a cool little thing I didn't know about. Like, I just kind of like, oh, that's just the name of the race. No, it's actually a holiday on Tatooine. So
yeah,
I thought that was pretty cool.
The more you know.
The more you know. As the Rodian exits and Peli complains, she waits until he's completely gone to tell the Jawas to bring out the exact parts that she needs to fix the speeder. And she just scammed this poor fellow. And overhead, they see Din's N1 starfighter arrive, and it lands, and Peli's excited to see Din and promises a tune-up on the N1. But what she's really excited for is to see Grogu. She's kind of like that fun, crazy aunt for Grogu, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, he has that role filled in his life. Always great to see her. It's we've come to love Peli.
Yeah. And I kind of feel like I was kind of expecting this whole episode to take place on Tatooine to find IG-11's part and stuff, and then maybe go to the Mines of Mandalore from there.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I was thinking maybe we were going to have to like raid a sand crawler or something like that to find that missing piece. But it seems like we're maybe, we could come back around to it, but we may not find that piece.
That's something that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, okay, we'll put a pin in that then.
Yeah, we're almost there. It's just... Yeah. So she wants to know where he is when suddenly he flips out of the cockpit and into Peli's arms. Surprise. She wants to know who taught him to leap like a lerman. And Grogu responds with some babble, and Peli is absolutely convinced that Grogu said her name. And speaking from experience, people do this with babies all the time. They're convinced that, your baby just said this. It's like, no,
it's just kind of some baby speak.
Babble. Yeah. Din tells her that he's there for business, and this is an interesting part right here. She asks if the Hutts are back or if he's taking on Boba Fett.
Yeah, and that's nice to just kind of remind us that Boba Fett is on Tatooine, like
and he's in charge
during this scene, right? It's a good reminder just of everything that happened in the Book of Boba Fett, and I think it's kind of proof that things seem to be going pretty all right on Tatooine.
I think it's only fair if Boba Fett gets 2 episodes in this season of The Mandalorian, right?
You're right. I think that would be equitable.
So maybe he'll come back around and just have 2 solo episodes. But he tells her that he's actually there because he needs a droid part, and that makes sense, right? You got to go to Peli Motto. She's probably got the part for IG-11, and so the pit droids get the Jawas to come back, and they confirm that they won't be able to find one of those memory units because they're so old. She even calls him like a grandpa, like, oh, what are you doing with this? And Peli says there's no chance cubes. Another episode 1
reference to Watto. Yep.
Yeah, that they'll find one, and then suggest taking R5D4. Now let's stop right here.
Oh, we've got to camp out for a second.
So, did you find it a little odd that he was just like, okay, I guess I won't use IG-11?
Yeah,
I did too.
To me, I think we're going to eventually come back to it because they made a big deal about taking the parts out of the statue, introducing the Anzellans, all that stuff. They don't go out of their way to do that if we're not going to eventually get IG-11 back.
I agree. That's exactly what I was going to say too.
So there's going to be some reason that they do indeed have to have IG-11, and they'll chance upon the memory part for him.
Maybe somehow R5D4 gets implanted into IG-11 and then it's like a completely different droid at that point.
R5D4's like personality and memories and everything, but in IG-11's body.
That's exactly it.
So it's just like an astromech droid that can hold a blaster.
Not only an astromech droid, but a traumatized astromech droid.
Oh my goodness. Okay. R5D4 is actually one of the more storied characters in Star Wars, turns out.
Where would, like, if people are not seasoned on droid names, like they know R2D2, they know BB-8, C-3PO, who is R5D4?
So it's just basically, a red astromech droid, kind of like R2D2. You've seen him if you've watched the episode. Hopefully you have seen the episode before you're listening to this.
Where did we see him first, though?
The first place we saw him was in A New Hope.
That's right.
So he's, been in Star Wars from the beginning.
Yep.
He's been around. He's the droid that has a bad motivator.
Yep.
Uncle Owen says.
Yeah.
But he blows a motivator. They were gonna purchase him, but instead they get R2, which seems to be coincidence at first. But the more books and comics you read, you learn that there have actually been a couple different explanations for why that happened in universe.
So give us the old canon explanation of R5D4, because I think the listeners need to hear this. It's just so incredible.
Yes. So the original backstory for R5D4, he was actually not named R5D4.
Yeah.
This was like a one-off comic thing. I can't even remember it's like Star Wars Adventures or something like that. Can't even remember the comic line name, but basically there's a comic called Skippy the Jedi Droid. And if that sounds like it's a comic about a force-sensitive astromech droid, you would be correct. This droid is force-sensitive, and the Force actually directs him to blow his motivator in order for R2 to be selected, because that's the will of the Force. He has to do that for, all the events of Star Wars to go the way they do. So the Force, communicates to him, a droid, that he needs to do this.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Skippy the Jedi droid.
Well, that's not
goofy, but it's fun.
That's not canon anymore, right? So
no.
The canon version might actually be worse, because
it's honestly probably worse.
There's a short story called The Red One, and from a certain point of view. And basically you learn that when they are in the Jawa's land, what is that called? Sandcrawler. When they're in the Sandcrawler, basically R2 figures out that R5 is going to be sold first, and so he takes it upon himself to save the rebellion and sacrifice R5 in doing so. And basically, how would you feel, Mac, if you woke up one morning and I was performing brain surgery on you, and you're like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm saving the world."
Yep.
Well,
to me, I think that might make you a little bit of a bad guy, because that's kind of a villainous thing to do.
And that's exactly what R2 did.
Could not imagine just waking up, with my body open in some manner with somebody, prying around in it. That's insane. But that's what R2 does. He's a menace, to be honest.
He is a menace.
Definitely changed my opinion of R2 after reading that.
Hurt his image a little bit, but R2's got to do what he's got to do to save the galaxy, and it's on him. So sorry, R5. So basically he blew the motivator according to canon.
Yeah,
but
R2 sabotaged him.
Yeah, he did. So all that to say, this is that droid. So let's get back into it. Din explains that he can't use an astromech because he needs one that is rated for spelunking and that can go ahead of him and test the air on Mandalore and see if it's breathable. And as he's talking, R5 is just shaking because of all the trauma he's been through in his life. Yep. And Peli says, this R5 astromech is built for adventure. You're supposed to be piloting starfighters across the galaxy and fighting tyranny, which is really funny because, had his motivator not blown, he would have been Luke Skywalker's droid.
Right. He would have been the scrappy sidekick, getting everybody out of jams.
But I kind of like the personality that he's scared.
Yeah,
I kind of like that.
I love that it's consistent with all the other material they've put out on him, because I mean, like, if I had been through that, I would also be a little traumatized.
Yep. So Peli says that she can reinstall the droid port, and he can even pilot the starfighter, and that's going to help much later. And it was a little weird that he was so adamant about IG-11, and he quickly pivoted to this. But like you said, I think it's going to come back up again. Like, IG-11 is going to come up again at some point. I don't think you just take that all down and bring that up for no reason.
We've spent a lot of time setting up IG-11's return. Yeah. It would be wild if they did not bring him back.
And the way the season's going, it's possible. So
it's true.
We cut to R5 rising out of the droid port, and it's night now. R5 is still scared, and Peli gives him a pep talk as fireworks begin to pepper the night sky. She warns Din that R5 circuitry may be a little off, and then before Din can protest, shuts the cockpit, and Din and Grogu take off in the celebration of Bunta, and we cut to black. Title credits, The Mandalorian Chapter 18, The Mines of Mandalore.
Yeah. And I mean, once you see the title, you're just like, what? We're doing what in this second episode of season 3?
And honestly, it makes me wonder, Mac, if they had originally planned releasing 2 episodes together like they did Obi-Wan Kenobi, like they did Andor. I know the people at the premiere got to see both episodes together, because we were talking about on our last breakdown how when typically a season premiere ends with The Mandalorian, there's a big shocking thing that happens at the end.
Right.
Well, there's a big shocking thing that happens at the end of this episode. So
yeah,
I don't know. We'll see.
I definitely could see a world in which they planned that and then moved things around. Or, I mean, like, the material that we got in the Book of Boba Fett that was really pertaining to The Mandalorian,
True.
That stuff could have just been originally included to be in this season, and for whatever reason we get down the line and they decided to move it up, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I apologize for coughing. I've got bronchitis, Mac.
I'm sorry, man.
It's
I hope
okay.
you start feeling better soon.
It's all right. They gave me steroids to make me feel better, and it just kept me up all night. So
you're juicing.
1 hour and 30 minutes of sleep doing this. Let's go. If it gets weird,
you know, Vince McMahon.
Let's go. You're fired. Okay, so we open back up to the N1 flying towards the destroyed planet of Mandalore, and Din explains that it was once green and beautiful back when the songs were written, and now
we've never seen that.
No, we've never seen that in canon at all. Like, it's always been kind of destroyed because of all the warfare that's gone on the planet.
Yep.
But now the surface is covered in glass. It's even worse than what we saw before. And storms are raging above it. And Din says, it's Mandalore, the home world of our people. Every Mandalorian can trace their roots back to this planet and the Beskar mines deep within.
Yeah. I love that we're reinforcing the idea of, like, the lineage of the armor and that it comes from Beskar. So it's a tie to the planet for all Mandalorians. Yeah, I think I meant to say the Beskar comes from the Mines of Mandalore.
Yes, right. So, that's like where it started.
Yeah, so I mean, I love that we're continuing that idea of, like, lineage and legacy kind of being passed on through armor in Mandalorian culture.
Yeah, and so he lets Grogu know he's never been there, which is kind of shocking, like, when you start to think, like, you're a Mandalorian that's never been to Mandalore, but instead he grew up on Concordia and points to it. And so, again, if you want to know more about these planets, make sure you check out our Mandalorian History 201, Part 1 and 2. We talk about Concordia a lot and why that's important and who's on there. So that kind of gives you some clues about Din's upbringing, I think. And then he mentions that Kalevala is in the same system. Yeah. And so that's something we did not know. Like, it was in the same solar system as Mandalore.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, they talk about it as the Mandalorian sector, right?
Yes.
That's what kind of indicates all of Mandalorian space. So it's interesting that you have even different systems within the Mandalorian sector.
Right. It could be several solar systems within that sector of Mandalore space. I'm assuming Concord Dawn is somewhere out there, which is another Mandalorian planet in Crow Nest. And
if you're watching on the YouTube, it's behind us right now.
That's right. And so he once again emphasizes to Grogu just how important being able to navigate the galaxy is, And Mac, besides what Grogu has to do later, is this set up for something further in the future? Because he keeps like teaching him these things, especially navigation.
Yeah, I mean, I think thematically we're looking at, so like Mandalorian culture, we know warfare, conflict, all of that kind of thing has always been a part of it. We're pretty well acquainted with that. I think a theme of this season is that Din is trying to teach Grogu that like part of being a Mandalorian is always knowing your way. And I think that's a really cool idea to kind of, strengthen, this is the way, has multiple meanings in that regard, right? We're talking about the creed, but then we're also talking about like, we know our personal paths.
Yeah.
And so Din is, in this season really setting out on a personal path. He's choosing for himself. He is going to go do this errand that is going to kind of redeem him in the eyes of, his family and the culture he grew up in. So I think, all this time he's spending just pointing out to Grogu kind of how to navigate the universe is just thematically strengthening that concept.
Yeah. I don't know. It makes me start to wonder, are we going to see Grogu on his own a little at some point, either this season or in the future?
I mean, we have more in this episode than we ever have before.
Yes.
So I think it's likely.
Yeah, they're kind of setting that up, it seems like. So they dip down through the storm clouds surrounding Mandalore, and when they come out the other side, they see just how devastated the planet actually is. And because of the magnetic fields being out of whack, Din mentions how they won't be able to communicate with anyone in the galaxy. Like once they land, they're on their own. They're not going to be able to call anybody for help. It kind of sets the stakes there.
Yeah, and you love it. You love to see it. High stakes make everything fun.
Yeah. So like at this point in the episode, I was like, oh, okay, here we go. This is going to be, whatever they're about to do is about to be big. When you say a line like that, they're setting something, set something up. So once they land, Din wants R5 to go and explore the opening to the ruins of the capital city of Sundari. That's where they're going. And after some hesitation, R5 goes out to take his reading and then disappears from view. But then he also disappears off their radar. And Din realizes he will have to go get him, so he pressurizes his helmet and does his best Darth Vader impression. Yeah. He walks towards the rocky outcrop and promises to Grogu he will be back. And this is where I'm like, okay, here we go. What are the mines going to look like? And he enters the eerily green tinted cave and then comes to an immense void. And the remains of Sundari are right there off the edge of the cliff. It was very cool to see this in live action.
Absolutely. Both. I mean, this is our first look at Sundari in live action.
Yeah.
What a time period to visit in on it.
Right.
But yeah, it was just really cool to see, like, you could still tell that all the structures they looked the same as they did in Clone Wars, just had been obliterated,
For sure.
A lot of the same design motifs are hanging, you can catch here and there kind of in the corners and stuff.
The Cubism style is present.
Yeah, I really liked the way it looked.
I did too. I thought it looked great. It reminded me exactly the way it looked in the Clone Wars. I was like, yeah, good job, guys. That was good. Yeah. So then suddenly, though, as he's looking at it, Din is attacked by 3 cave-dwelling creatures. And for a second, I thought those Mandalorian theories that we had back before the season started, maybe this is true. These might be like radiated Mandalorians, but that's not what they are.
Right.
When we actually get a good look at them, they kind of look like rat ghouls from the Knights of the Old Republic. So
you can, I mean, that's at this point, I think that's the free space on the Children of the Watch bingo card is just a KOTOR reference.
But you know what else they kind of look like to me?
What's that?
Tongs. And not like the salad tongs, but like
Taung.
Yeah, the Tongs, which in the old EU, not canon, were the original Mandalorians. And there might be a connection there.
I think so. I mean, they're hanging out on Mandalore. They do look very similar. I can see a world in which the Tongs kind of were the first original species on Mandalore, started bringing other species in, via the foundling system. Eventually everybody's kind of welcome and Mandalore becomes what we know Mandalore as.
Which is a very similar thing to what the old canon or the old EU Sith did as well.
Exactly.
It's they
cool.
were once a species, yeah. So they brandish their axe weapons, and Din spins around, taking out the Darksaber to defend himself. It was really cool to see the Darksaber being wielded again.
Yeah.
But Mac, did you notice that he's struggling to use it still?
Yes, and I love that detail. And it gives me hope for an awesome Darksaber training sequence with Din, like we got with Kanan and Sabine in Star Wars Rebels. I would even love,
Sabine did it.
Sabine did it, and we got kind of a more Mandalorian perspective on those same Jedi principles, if that makes sense. Like, Kanan already did a great job of, putting that into a perspective that a Mandalorian could understand. But it'd be very interesting to see how Sabine taught Din to use the Darksaber.
Yeah, and Sabine is a character that we're expecting to see soon in live action, whether or not in this season or in Ahsoka. She is going to be in Ahsoka. She is a character from the animated show Star Wars Rebels. She's a Mandalorian. She had the Darksaber at one point. She's awesome. Yeah. It's still a little heavy for Din, and he eventually manages to kill all three of the creatures, and then he discovers that R5 has been knocked down. He escorts him back to the ship, and when they get there, R5 runs a report on the atmosphere, and we actually learn that it's breathable. And then Din says this line, "Bo-Katan was right. Mandalore is not cursed."
Like, what? Is that what she said, though?
Kind of. Well, she did. I think she said that in season 2.
Okay.
I think she said that in season 2. But then, I think the big takeaway from this is, the armorer said it was cursed, and now he's saying Bo-Katan's right. And he's basically saying the armorer was wrong.
Yeah, which, that could be kind of the first entry point into Din maybe trying out some new worldviews.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that, especially at the end. And I'm excited to have that conversation because it's a very nuanced, layered way that they approach this. And I really appreciate what they did at the end of this episode.
For sure.
I really appreciated it. So later, Grogu and Din walk back towards the entrance, and eventually they stop at the edge of the precipice, and Din points out the Civic Center. How he knows that's the Civic Center, I'm not really sure. It looks like one.
I don't even know what building you're pointing at.
Right. And so they jetpack down towards the bottom of the city together, and when they land, they notice another chasm that will lead them even further down towards the mines. They continue down through a well, taking them down to the very bottom in the sewers. I guess the same sewers that we saw Maul terrorize the city of Sundari in the Siege of Mandalore. This very same sewers, and a radiated alligator watches them as they inspect the sewer ducts, and they continue to explore until they come to an excavated tunnel. And there's so many cave passages. They're at yet another cave-like passage, and it's filled with scattered remnants of Mandalorian armor. Mm-hmm. His light comes to rest on the familiar T-shaped visor of a white Mandalorian helmet that's been really rusted over, and he bends down to reach for the helmet and picks it up to inspect it. Then suddenly, this shocked me, the floor snaps shut like a bear trap over Din. The ground flips over to show Din encased inside like a giant metal crab-like droid.
Yeah.
And then a needle jabs Din, and we see an Oculus show in an organic eye inside. And Grogu watches from the shadows as this crab-like droid marches off with Din. What in the world?
Yeah, this came out of nowhere. My immediate reaction was that a lot of the mechanics and kind of the way that the droid is constructed remind me of the body that Maul had kind of either he had built for himself or we find him
Maul
attached to this big spider thing, right?
Yes.
So I'm not saying this is Maul, but
I know.
It reminded me of that, and so I immediately thought of just a character who's been down here and gone insane, and has only managed to survive via this wild mechanical
they saved their own life by turning themselves into a droid, basically.
Right. Right.
Very General Grievous, but even less than Grievous. It's just an eye, it seems like, and probably a brain.
Yeah.
So I thought this was a really cool touch, but I've got so many questions about whoever this was, and will we get an answer to it? Because sometimes we don't.
And that's okay.
It is.
I mean, anytime you get just like we're spoiled nowadays because we have all this information about any given little side character in Star Wars just at our fingertips, you know. I'm all for just leaving some characters in a little bit of mystery, and that can always turn into a story down the road, you know.
Yeah. It doesn't need to be answered, but I do have a lot of questions about this.
I'm definitely curious.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. So we cut to the crab droid marching into a Temple of Doom-like set with Din inside a metal cage. Yeah. And Grogu sneaks in on foot, watching from a hiding space, and the droid sets Din into a rack. They called it a rotisserie rack on the audio.
I mean, I did think he was about to be rotisserie like a chicken.
It folds up, and then a smaller humanoid droid emerges, and I thought it looked very Transformer-like. Like... Very Michael Bay.
Very like Michael Bay Decepticon.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
Makes
sense.
There's something clearly organic in this droid, but I did have a second thought of like, is there a chance that is just all droid and something was projecting its eye via somewhere else into it? I mean, that's possible.
It is, yeah. I don't know. Maybe we should just keep an eye out for orange eyes inside
keep an eye
droids.
So another deep cut for those who are big Knights of the Old Republic fan. There was a comic, and there was a Mandalorian crazy scientist, and I got Dr. Demago vibes from this entire scene, and that's who that was in the old canon. It was just interesting because whoever this is, you would assume they might have been a Mandalorian at some point.
Right. Or
I don't know.
At least like, I mean, there could be several different things. It could be like, maybe an Imperial scientist that was on Mandalore that knew ahead of time. So was able to like head down into the mines to escape the blast. You know, it could be a lot of different things.
It could be a lot of different things. So operating a control panel, the creature takes a staff and extracts Din's weapons and tosses them aside. When the droid walks off, Grogu sneaks towards Din, and we see all sorts of scattered Mandalorian armor all over. So it seems like this droid thing has been killing Mandalorians or collecting their armor or something. I don't know what's going on there. But with the Force, Grogu tries to break Din out of the but the creature droid notices, and Din tells Grogu to go get bo-katan. Like, he's not going to be able to stop him. He needs help. Go get bo-katan. And the droid shoots electricity out of its staff at him, but Grogu flips over into his pram and escapes through the sewers. This totally could be a ride at Disney World.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
It's like an abandoned mine train kind of experience. Yeah. For sure. I think this guy or thing, whatever it is like harvesting blood for sustenance. That's what it seemed like to me. You know, draining Din so that
he can live.
Blood was probably all that machine needs for whatever organics are left in that droid. Yeah. We see Grogu like more so than ever. He is active. He's flipping around. He's doing Force stuff. So I really like the idea of Grogu. I like conceptually. I like that Grogu is doing more. He has more agency. He's a little bit more of his own character right now. The actual like visuals and everything, I'm not sold on yet. But I am also a person who did not love Yoda flipping around in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It just, the little guys doing all the flips and stuff is not always my thing.
Not your thing.
But I love that we're getting a more active Grogu, a Grogu with more agency, able to make his own choices.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing for me is like he's finally coming into his own a little bit instead of just being a cute sidekick. Yep. He's actually doing some things, right?
And we need that. We need progression of the character. I mean,
right.
Especially if we're dealing with, a years long time period, I don't see my niece and nephew, if I don't see them for a matter of like a couple months, their personalities and they grow so much, like they change. So Grogu, even though he ages so slowly, 2 years, you're going to notice a change.
Yeah, you should. You should at least. So just as he's about to exit, one of the creatures blocks his way, and Grogu pushes him out with the Force. And making it safely back to the cockpit, Grogu points to Kalevala on the charts, and R5 takes off. R5's so brave here. I'm so proud of him.
He's overcoming his past fears,
And, isn't that what Star Wars is all about?
I mean, I thought that Star Wars was all about the friends that we made along the way.
That's true. So back on Kalevala, bo-katan continues to sulk on her throne, and she's a woman without purpose, but all of that is about to change. What an episode for her, Mac. I mean, she stole this episode, I feel like.
For sure. I mean, we get kind of a new sulking stance on the throne. But yeah, in a big way, we get to see some of the coolest bo-katan action, I think, in this episode. We get to she is now playing a major role, both plot wise and also symbolically, I feel like, in Din's arc.
Oh yeah.
And then she's also in the middle of having her own arc. So there's a lot going on for bo-katan so far. This is kind of turning into her season a little bit.
I'm okay with that.
I'm more than okay with that.
I'm okay with that. And if you want more bo-katan, we've actually covered every single episode of the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels that she's appeared in. You can find that at the very bottom of our feed, basically. But if you want more of her story, that's where you look. Watch those episodes. I've been rewatching some of those Clone Wars episodes because I feel like I need to, especially with this season. I think I need to get some of that back in my mind. And it's a lot of fun. So her droid servant walks in to tell her that another visitor has arrived, and she seems more than a little annoyed by everyone interrupting her sulking. She just wants to sulk.
Yeah. I get that too. I get in sulky moods, and when I'm in a sulky mood, don't
Leave
ask
me
me
alone.
to do anything. Yeah.
Leave me alone. Yeah, so she walks over, and it's raining, of course. So
Of course.
She walks over to the rain-streaked windows to see Din's in one, and bo-katan is just over it. And she's going to turn him away and not even let him in the castle, and she goes out to greet him, but sees no one's in the cockpit. When it opens and she sees Grogu, there's actually genuine concern from Bo when she hears Grogu whimper. And I love that because there was a moment in the off season where we were wondering, are they going to make Bo-Katan a villain?
Yep.
No.
And absolutely not. And
she might be an antagonist at some points, but she's not a villain.
I mean, there's still going to be some conflict over the Darksaber and stuff like that. She's got some unresolved things that could put her, could kind of pit her against some of our other characters we're following. But definitely not a villain, and that's definitely she is, like, in this episode, they do a great job of showing her as a warrior, as someone who is capable and competent, but then they also clue you in on the fact that she's compassionate as well.
Yes.
And that's so important.
Super important. And so she wants to know what happened to Din, and she wants to download the information from R5. And then we just immediately cut to a scene with Bo-Katan's Cormac fighter lifting off. And I kind of love the fast-paced speed of it. I've seen a lot more criticism around The Mandalorian's pacing, but honestly, it's still the same show it's always been.
Yeah.
I think comparing it to a traditional TV show like Andor is futile, because to me, this is truly like a 1940s serial.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the essence of that thing George Lucas was trying to capture with Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's some instances where the action gets a little repetitive when you have like two approaches to Mandalore in the same episode and that kind of stuff. There is some of that I think is valid criticism.
Yeah, for sure.
But overall, I really, really enjoy the pacing, and I think you're right. It's just capturing that like childlike wonder in the approach to adventure, I think, and that's a really special thing. So
where Andor, a series like Andor and probably The Acolyte are more like Star Wars novels, The Mandalorian is way more like a Star Wars comic book.
That's a fantastic way to phrase that. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
It just gets straight to the action,
Yep.
Let's not waste time. So, yeah, I love it, but we want to take some time right now and tell you about our sponsors, and it's you guys. You are our sponsors, the listeners who join the Patreon, patreon.com/TheMandalorianWatch. That's our original name for the show. You can go to our Patreon. We've got a Discord server there that is kind of like a very fun, very fast, interactive message board where we talk about Star Wars all day long. We also have over 60 bonus episodes over on our Patreon, including our bonus voicemail hotline episodes that you will have in season. So if you liked our voicemail hotline episodes, you get a brand new one as well, exclusive only to the patrons. And we're also covering the Bad Batch over on the Patreon. So if you're interested in that and you can support us in that way, it's just $2 a month to gain access to all of this and more. So we would love to see you over there joining the watch.
Absolutely.
A lot of fun over there. So back to the episode. Bo and Grogu travel to Mandalore, and I really, really love Katie's acting as she sees Mandalore's surface.
Oh, yeah. She's got to do a lot without, because I mean, she and Grogu aren't talking that much,
No.
And so she has to do a lot just with her expressions and physical performance. So yeah, hats off to Katie Sackhoff.
Yeah, she did great, and she tells Grogu that it didn't always look like this, and you can see her remembering it for what it was. And they land, and Bo asks Grogu to guide her to Din, and we cut to them exiting her ship, and R5 watching from the ship. Cautiously, they enter the cave. They, too, reach the edge of the cliff, and she removes her helmet to look at her former city, and she says, "This was once a beautiful civilization. My family ruled it all. Now it's a tomb." And again, we'll get into the aspects of that ruling family. I feel like some of the dynamics have changed from what we knew. It seems like the Kryze family actually had a longer legacy ruling Mandalore than what I thought.
Yeah, in my head, Satine was the first Kryze to be in any kind of prominent position.
Nope.
Yeah, not the case.
Not the case. She just took it on, and we'll talk about Satine a lot, which is Bo-Katan's older sister, also Obi-Wan Kenobi's secret girlfriend.
Ooh, scandalous.
Voyage of Temptation. She puts her helmet back on, and they descend down into the bowels of Mandalore, landing at the tunnel entrance.
You just really needed to get that emphasis on bowels.
Grogu sees the radiation gator, that's what I put in my notes, and gets scared to move forward. And Bo-Katan stops and acknowledges that he's scared, but she needs him to guide. And after giving a little grunt, he moves forward and she follows. And I really like that Bo tries to connect with Grogu here. And she goes on to say, "I knew quite a few Jedi, I don't know what they taught you about us, but there was a time we actually got along quite well, fought side by side." And she's referring to the Clone Wars.
Right.
Specifically Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ahsoka.
Yeah. That time was pretty short, to be fair. We're talking
Half the time she was in the bad guy side.
Right. She was actually actively fighting against the Jedi for a lot of that. So but there was a real hot second there that the Jedi and Mandalorians were fighting on the same side.
Yep, and it was awesome to see.
It was dope. Yeah.
It was so cool.
Watch season 7 of the Clone Wars for sure.
Oh, so good. And then she asks how good he is at the Force and compliments his initiative to get back to her. And then she freezes when she notices the shadows above them. And she pulls her blasters out and blasts away at the cave dwellers. And she expertly takes them down. And afterwards, Grogu stares in amazement at her. And this is where we get that line, "Did you think your dad was the only Mandalorian?"
Yeah, I mean, we just watched Din struggle.
Yeah, right.
And Bo-Katan is not breaking a sweat.
Now, I do say, to give Din a little credit, he's got that Indiana Jones-ness to him where he fights. It's like you feel like he's losing, but he somehow wins every time.
His biggest superpower is taking a punch.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that's been we've been saying that since day one.
Yeah, he's got that.
In that he's like Indy in that way.
Yeah. And then we learn that these creatures are called Alamites, and they eat people. They lived in the surface wastelands beyond the city walls, and they've crept into the ruins, and she wonders what else survived. I do want to go back to their look. They have those husks a little bit. They kind of do look like a mythosaur a little bit, don't they?
They do, at least in like motif,
Yes.
which is interesting. It could
like from the same planet.
Right, it could point to some divergent evolution way back there or something like that.
Right. So back in the Temple of Doom cage, the robotic creature is hooking Din up to a machine that seems to be sucking out his blood.
Yes.
Like you said, Mac, I think you're right. Like he's trying to get life to keep living, I guess.
I think this is how it sustains itself or whatever. Yeah. Something like that. But once Din's blood, for sure.
Yeah. So Din can do nothing to stop this thing, and then suddenly Bo marches in firing, and the droid thing zaps her with the energy staff, knocking her down. She was not ready for that. And then we get a huge moment in this episode. Bo sees the darksaber laying in the dirt and grapples it with her hands, and she expertly wields it in defense. She's really good with it, Mac. Really good.
I mean, like, almost like she spent a long time training with it or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, she had it once before, and she's really good with it. She managed, like, it's so light to her, right? Whereas Din, it's very heavy and cumbersome. Not with her.
Do you think that that's kind of pointing towards Din's, like, his spiritually compromised state?
I don't know.
It's hard to say too,
I don't
because
know that he's
Bo-Katan,
spiritually compromised.
And
she would be more spiritually compromised than him.
I agree with you there too, because Din is the one still like actively pursuing and like walking the path. We kind of talked about that a lot on the voicemail episode.
Like whether or not that's the true path, he believes it wholeheartedly.
Right. Is it just because he doesn't know the particulars of wielding the darksaber that it's heavy for him, or is there something else going on there? I
think there's something else going on. Maybe the darksaber knows.
What does it mean?
Maybe the darksaber knows it's not supposed to be with him.
Could be.
I don't know. So she manages to stab the droid with it, and the droid goes inert and falls, and she rushes to Din and asks if he's all right. And down on the ground, the creature's oculus flickers back open, and it detaches its head from its body. Weakly, Din warns Bo that there's something behind her, and she turns and dodges just in time as the crab spider mech attacks from behind. And she cuts the legs out from under it and finally stabs it in the head. And the Oculus's eye closes for good this time.
As far as we know.
So Bo marches to Din. That could be like the Golem.
Yeah.
For if we're doing our Lord of the Rings.
The Moria comparison. Interesting.
Casey will like that. Our good friend Casey. Bo marches to Din and he passes out. And then we cut to Bo making what we learn is Pog soup with the city behind them. And Din starts asking what happened and how she found him. Din then admits to Bo that she was right and Mandalore is not cursed, but she's not so sure anymore. And they say, a great society is now a memory. I once ruled here for a brief time. Now it's destroyed. Nothing to cling to but ashes. And so you can kind of feel the hurt and regret in Bo's voice from this. What I think is really funny during this whole scene, Grogu really wants the soup. Like the whole time he's reaching for it. She gets up and hands it to Din, and she can't believe that he's never had Pog soup, which I guess is a Mandalorian staple.
Right. It's funny because the Children of the Watch are out here claiming like we're the real Mandalorians. We haven't, abandoned the ways, and like Bo-Katan's like, you don't even know our cuisine.
Do you think Pog soup was distributed by the same distributors of that drink that was on Mandalore in the corruption episode?
I'm shaking. It looked like Surge.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, it's some whatever tea it was, but it looked like surge. Yeah, it could be. Maybe Pog. They have like a little instant version of Pog soup, like ramen noodles or something like that.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
She urges him to rest, but Din is determined to get down into the mines. And this is the part where you're like, okay, Din is still a believer. And the creators, John and Dave, they don't want you. I don't feel like they want the audience to turn on the Children of the Watch, at least not yet.
Yeah, and I think that's more interesting than just being like, this group's wrong, this group's right, or, you know.
Yes.
More and more, I'm convinced we're working towards a reconciliation.
Yes.
Because maybe not in like what the characters are saying or doing, but in the way that the show is portraying the relationship between the Children of the Watch and Mandalorianism of the mainstream variety, whatever. We need it. Yeah, I'm just going to start referring to Bo-Katan and larger Mandalore as mainstream Mandalore.
Yeah.
I think just for simplicity, we'll define that term. Yeah, we're headed towards a reconciliation, and that means huge things for Mandalore.
I think there's just a part of me, too, that appreciates, like, they're not downing the belief that Din has. Like I really appreciate that approach of, like, he might be wrong about some things, but his like earnestness is not wrong. What his drive and his goal and his vision, it's not wrong.
Right.
And I appreciate that
for sure
with how they're doing that. I think that's really cool.
It's consistent with Luke, on the Falcon in New Hope. Like he, believing that he can do it until he believes that he can, deflect the training droid's bolts and everything like that. He can't, but then when he does believe, he can.
Right.
So I mean, that's a core theme of Star Wars. Love to see it explored in this, avenue.
Absolutely. And so Din is, like I said, he's determined to go down into the mines. Bo says it's adorable that he believes these children's stories, but there's nothing magic about the waters. And then Din says this really interesting thing: without the creed, what are we? What do we stand for? Our people are scattered like stars in the galaxy. The creed is how we survived. You rescued me, and I'll always be in your debt. That last part right there might be important later.
Yeah.
Because she rescues him more than once in this episode.
Uh-huh.
He goes on to say he can't go with her until he's fulfilled his obligation. And Bo then unexpectedly says that she will take him to the living waters. And I think there's part of this that I really love. Like, Bo's like, he is so earnest about this. I kind of want to go see what happens.
Yeah, Din is inspiring Bo-Katan.
Yes, I love
his
that.
belief is inspiring her to be like, well, when was the last time I really looked at this place or these customs, these traditions with his eyes?
Yes,
and it's that idea is captivating enough to her to push her forward. Along with Din.
Yep. And so as they walk through the ruins, Din marvels at that it was once filled with their kind, and Bo reminds him that it wasn't actually that long ago, and she goes on to say, the Empire set out to punish us, to wipe away our memory. Now, why do you think that the Empire would want to wipe away the memory of the Mandalorians, Mac?
You don't want anyone to have the idea that you can rise up against the Empire.
Also, like, behind the Jedi, the Mandalorians are your biggest threat.
Right. I mean, it's the same idea as the Jedi, just completely erasing any mention or, anything, like they were never even there at all.
Yeah.
That's the Empire's approach to like truly having power over their enemies, I think, is being able to just eradicate them from even history.
Yep. I love that. That's exactly what they want to do.
Yeah.
Right? Because by the time of A New Hope, people are like, Jedi weren't real.
Right. And that's been, 20 years?
The Empire's really good at gaslighting the whole galaxy.
Yeah.
Basically.
For sure.
So Din says it must pain her to see the city like this. She goes on to say what actually bothers her is to see the Mandalorians fighting one another. And you're starting to see that flame in Bo-Katan starting to awaken. And it's just like, oh, yes. Like, this is what I've always wanted for her. That natural born leader is in her. And she just really loves the Mandalorians like we do. And then they arrive to the entrance of the Mines of Mandalore. And it really does remind me of something like we had seen in The Lord of the Rings.
Absolutely. I mean, pretty much as we kind of thought. It's mythical. It's, ancient, mysterious seeming.
I love that you said the word mythical, not just because of mythosaur, but this episode was very mythic.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We're dealing with this could be like an Arthurian legend kind of thing, where it's a quest with ancient, dangerous locations that previously people thought were even inaccessible to people. And we're retrieving these things. We're going to this place that no one's been in years. And yeah, I agree with you. It's like the stuff of legends. And I mean, that's when Star Wars is a new mythology.
Yes.
And so, I mean, that's when it's at its best.
I agree. So, I love it so much. So as they enter, Bo releases a floating light orb. That's very handy. And they've got to think, you've got to think that Tar Vizsla, the Mandalorian Jedi who built the Darksaber, probably found the Black Kyber crystal down here, right?
You would think. It makes sense.
We had a really, really great theory on our bonus voicemail hotline about Tar Vizsla and what could else be down here. Mm-hmm. Go check that out on the Patreon.
Definitely check that out.
Den comments on how much older everything looks down there, and then ask if bo-katan has been to the Living Waters, and she confirms that she did go when she was a child. Here's where it gets super interesting to me. Okay. She says, I was part of the royal family. I took the creed and was showered with gifts, but the rituals were all just theater for our subjects. They loved watching the princess recite the Mandalorian tenets as her father looked on proudly. Such a heartwarming spectacle.
So much there.
Holy cow.
Yeah. The first thing I'd like to do, because I think it's the quickest, is just to point out the parallel between the opening scene of this season with the Children of the Watch standing with the waters. It seems like
they're recreating that
ceremony is something that's shared between the two.
Yes.
The two factions.
Yeah.
Some idea of that, right? And that
whereas mainstream Mandalorians maybe don't believe in the power of it anymore. It's more of a ritual.
Right.
For the Children of the Watch, it's absolutely spiritual.
Yeah, but the same, like the tradition, no matter what you make of it, is present in both factions, which I think is really cool.
So another thing is, like you said earlier, we thought Satine, which is Bo-Katan's older sister, was for sure the first ruler of the Kryze family over Mandalore. It does not seem that way at all.
No, it seems like they're a
generation.
What's the word? Generational kind of royal family type thing. And
they could have been in charge for a while.
Monarchy. Yeah. I mean, did they have the Darksaber at this point? I guess not, because Pre Vizsla had it.
Yeah.
So what was the thing that instituted the Kryze reign?
I don't know. That's interesting.
Was a Kryze Mandalore in the traditional sense, or are the Children of the Watch specifically mad at Clan Kryze for kind of ruining the lineage of Mandalore? Because maybe they were ruling without the Darksaber, that kind of thing.
And then you also have to start to question, how old is Bo-Katan? Is this before the Mandalorian Civil Wars or right after the Mandalorian Civil Wars? Because we always assume Satine took over Sundari and Mandalore after the Mandalorian Civil Wars. Could this have been actually, no, her dad took over and then there was still some stuff that happened? I don't know. It seems like he died in the Civil Wars to me.
Right. It did me too. I mean, they could have been the royal family for a long time, and they just won the Civil War as the royal family, and then installed Satine, who decided, I'm going to make my rule different. And that's New Mandalore,
There's actually a line in here that I think could hint to that. So obviously the Kryze family, or at least her father and Bo-Katan, did not believe in any of this. I don't think Satine did either. I think Satine probably the least of them, actually.
Absolutely. she didn't even care about the tradition.
Yeah, she totally did away with all of it. And so that's so interesting to think about that, of oh wow, that would be such a cool thing to see maybe one day. maybe we can get the Tales of the Mandalore, like that we have Tales of the Jedi, that little animated series. Din points out her father probably was proud, and then Bo makes an interesting comment. She says, "I know he was. I didn't embarrass him in front of everyone." Now, you could take that of like she did her duty in the rituals, but you could also take that like Satine embarrassed him.
Yeah.
That's how I was like, is that why they're not mentioning Satine? Because we don't get a Satine name drop here.
Right. And I mean, like, when Bo and Satine are both alive and talking and interacting,
it's good.
Not great.
No. They
strange.
don't like each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it seems like to me, their father was a lot more temperate. His temperament was probably more like bo-katan.
Right.
Which we thought his temperament was more like Satine, and that's not the case. So Din says he sounds interesting. I agree. And he would have liked to have known him, and Bo agrees that he was a great man and says he died defending Mandalore. And then Din legitimately pauses and gives a very heartfelt, "This is the way," to honor him. Like, thank you for doing that for Mandalore. So The question is, who is Bo's father? Well, we do know that his name is Adonai Kryze. And if Adonai sounds familiar to some of you, it is the plural form of the Hebrew word Lord or Master. It's also a title that's used for God a lot. So that kind of tells me a little bit of maybe he's, like this dude was really in charge.
Yeah. The Mandalorian is starting to seem like Neon Genesis Evangelion with just all of like the biblical references and stuff that are just kind of in the background and like all these religious, imagery and everything.
Baptisms and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I want to know more about Adonai Kryze.
I do too. So we don't know much about him, but we speculated that he may have been a pacifist like Satine, Bo's older sister and ruler during the Clone Wars. But
doesn't
again,
seem
this whole thing has got me questioning that. I think he was more like Bo-Katan, maybe a little more aggressive.
I guess we kind of always thought Bo-Katan was the black sheep of the family.
Satine.
It might be Satine. Yeah.
It might be Satine. And so let's talk about the family real quick before we move on, because I did question why no mention of her. Was Adonai embarrassed by her? Very interesting twist there. Also, are they not mentioning Satine because maybe there's another Kryze sister going to be revealed and they don't want confusion for those who don't listen to this podcast?
It could be. We have theorized that maybe another Kryze sister is going to be revealed. Corky's got to come from somebody.
I mean, we don't know how many siblings there were. We just know about Bo and Satine and an unknown other one. I don't know. We'll see. After that little moment, Grogu stares at Bo, and then she asks what he's looking at. And they arrive into a subterranean cavern, another one, filled with water, and it's the Living Waters. They finally have made it, and steps lead down to the water's edge. But before Din gets in, Bo wants to show Din what is essentially a tourist plaque.
Yeah, it's just like a little historical marker.
It is, and it says this: these mines date back to the age of the first Mandalore. According to ancient folklore, the mines were once a mythosaur lair. Mandalore the Great is said to have tamed the mythical beast. It is from these legends that the skull signet was adopted and became the symbol of our planet. That's fun, right?
It is. I think they just needed to kind of find an in-story way to dump some exposition.
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah, it worked.
Din doesn't respond, though. He is truly having a heartfelt religious moment.
Yes.
Standing before those waters, he's going through something.
Yep.
Right.
He's not listening to Bo-Katan. He's not hearing a word.
Quietly, he begins removing his cape. He removes his weapons too, and finally his jetpack. And slowly, he enters the Living Waters, and Bo-Katan begins to realize how real this is for him. Mm-hmm. And I thought this was a really touching moment. Actually, just kind of gave me chills. Din says, I swear on my name and the names of the ancestors that I shall walk the way of the Mandalore, and the words of the creed shall be forever forged in my heart. And as soon as he finishes, he falls.
Yeah.
Now, at first, I thought that he was pulled down by the mythosaur. But
I think the ground just gave out from. I think it just
he just walked
stopped.
too far.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, this is unintentionally hilarious.
Yes, I do think there's a read on it that's very like it's this force, which is gravity, right?
Ooh,
Din has
yes.
kind of achieved this this goal, and this thing is gonna, like, now that he's kind of gotten to where he needs to be, he's done what he set out to do. It's almost like, so I've kind of theorized that the force, like Jedi can kind of, it's a religious thing for a lot of people, right? So the Jedi can use it, manipulate it, but there's a whole lot of normal people who worship it and kind of follow the teachings and things like that, but don't have that same connection. I think the Force can work through Mandalorianism.
Absolutely.
And I mean, like, the Force is kind of guiding everything in Star Wars, right? I mean, that's
even if you
been
can't
said,
touch it or access it. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, like, I think this is kind of saying, like, the Force is pulling Din into his destiny.
I like that read on
might
it.
Be
well,
reading
I like
too
it
much
because,
into
like,
it, but
no, I think that's actually more appropriate than like a joke, you know, like because they set it up as like this is a really like spiritual moment,
right?
And then him just to be completely submerged and fall all the way to the bottom because he's wearing Beskar, that kind of takes the oomph out of it. But if it's your read on it in terms of, no, like he is bathing in the living waters of Mandalore. Like he is fully submerged.
Bathed.
Yes.
It's not him bathing, like he's being bathed, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah, I really actually like that read on it. I think that's really good. But here's another interesting twist to it. Bo quickly puts on her helmet and dives in. Now she also is too, Matt.
Yes. And what I love is that they both have different circumstances and different motivations, but they end up in the same place. And I think this sequence is hugely symbolic for almost everything important to the story of The Mandalorian. I think this is a definitely kind of a turning point for bo-katan. I think it's her inadvertently, like, in a lot of things in her life, she's been pulled in different directions, right? I mean, like, she didn't really ask for the Darksaber.
No.
It was kind of bestowed upon her by Sabine. She didn't ask for a lot of things in life, right?
Yeah.
But she's been a lot of places. And I think this is just the next kind of jumping off point for her. She's being pulled in pursuit of saving a friend, right? She's looking out for Mandalorians, and that's what brings her in. I think that's going to kind of speak to her character arc. Like, she's going places because she's going to look after Mandalore. Does that make sense? Like, there's so much symbolism.
There is. That's what I really appreciated about this whole scene, because, you know, when you think back to the prophecy that the armor mentioned in the Book of Boba Fett, well, now this is where the prophecy gets a little interesting, because it could apply to Din or it could apply to bo-katan.
Mm-hmm. Or both of them together, these representatives of these two different things kind of coming together.
Yeah. So they're both being renewed by the living waters, and she fires her jetpack to propel herself down underwater. And I mean, Din just sank straight to the bottom because of his armor. She finally finds him and dives towards him, picking him up to rescue him. But then as Bo and Din ascend, their lights begin to make out a giant creature in the water in a very familiar shape. It's the mythosaur.
Yep.
Holy
Episode
cow.
2 of season 3. We got a mythosaur.
Now, I don't know if you had this read on it or not. It kind of had kind eyes. It felt like it didn't seem menacing in a way that, like, I thought it might.
I think it's been waiting on them. I think the mythosaur is, I mean, as this symbol of, you know, Mandalore and Mandalorians on the whole, right? I think it's been waiting for this moment. It's been waiting for Din and bo-katan. It's been waiting for kind of this reconciliation. There's a lot of there's just so many layers to this scene. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It didn't lash out or try to attack them or anything like that, you know?
Just swam away. It's like it acknowledged that they were there, but it's not going to attack them, at least not yet. We don't know what's going to happen in the next episode, right?
I guess that's true. Yeah.
It darts off into the darkness, and then they crash back to the surface, breathing hard as Bo looks out towards the waters. We cut to black, and that's the end of the episode, and I lost it.
Absolutely. I was just like, what? It was very early in the morning, and I was losing my mind.
That's why we do it, right? Like we are, this is what makes The Mandalorian fun. I mean, the possibilities are endless going into chapter 19. Like, what's going to happen? I feel like if we're just going to go ahead and speculate a little bit, what do we think is going to happen next?
Yeah, I mean, so the next the big logical step to me is a return to the armorer, right? Because Din has now accomplished his goal. He has bathed in the living waters. I don't know, or they may try to investigate the mythosaur further. I don't know. But to me, it kind of seems like maybe they might go back to the Children of the Watch, and there might be some drama happening there because I think bo-katan will come with Din, maybe.
Ooh,
like she's had
her in the armor.
Yeah. That's kind of what I foresee coming up like immediately next, just because Din has now accomplished his task. It makes sense for him to, go turn the quest in to get his reward kind of thing.
Yeah.
If we're going video game logic.
But also, like, I wonder now, like, is Bo starting to believe more and more of, like, she's kind of coming out of that mainstreamness, maybe not all the way to the Children of the Watch, but more to that center of, like, okay, there is actually something going on now.
I think, she's definitely being kind of, like, opened up, right? She's being softened towards the Children of the Watch, I think, because things are happening that she never thought would have happened. I mean, the bubbles coming out of her helmet when she gasped underwater.
Yes.
I don't know if you
She definitely said some bad words.
Oh, yeah. It wasn't Dank Farrick either.
No.
No. But... So, I mean, like, I think she's going through it. I think she will be more open and more receptive towards the Children of the Watch and kind of actually talking things out and maybe getting to know each other a little bit. Yeah. I think this is the kind of the event that would be required to get her to that point,
Dude, chapter 19 is going to be insane.
Unless it's something that happens on their way back and it's a whole episode that's...
They have to kill Smog at the dragon. Yeah.
Right. There could be so many things. We truly don't know the roadmap forward from here.
And that's the thing is like what we kind of theorized happened.
It's done. So now it's an open book, and that's such an exciting place to be with the show.
The only thing that we pretty much know for sure is going to happen is the pirates are going to attack Navarro again at some point, and the Mandalorians are probably going to go bail them out again on Navarro. And then after that, who knows?
Yeah. Some circumstances are going to get a bunch of Mandalorians, probably from both kind of sides, both factions, together to fight, maybe? That's like the only thing that I would think would be a given.
I think the Empire is going to come back into this in a big way.
Yeah.
We might, and I want to give Heather from the Discord credit for this, we might be getting some Thrawn tent before this is all said and done, because like if we're doing the Mines of Mandalore in the second episode and we've got 6 more episodes, what is in store for us? Who knows? I mean, we have no idea. They did say that every episode is going to have some shocking thing happen in it, and so far that's been true.
Yep.
I can't wait to see what happens next, but we would love to hear what you guys think is going to happen next. And so we would love for you to call into our voicemail hotline and leave your thoughts and theories. Make sure you leave your name, where you're from, and then keep it under 3 minutes. If you mess up, that's okay. Just hang up and call again. It's 205-259-6675 to call that. And we're excited to hear what you guys think. But Mac, is there any other last thoughts on the Mines of Mandalore before we head out of here?
I think I've said pretty much everything I've got to say, except that I could also talk about this for days and days and days. So,
and listen, I would if I were not feeling like death right now.
If your body was not actively shutting down. Yeah.
Yes.
Please go get some rest. Feel better. Alex, we need you at 100% because, we got a lot of Mandalorian stuff to talk about this month and the next month. So
there's so much more. I'm going to be spending the rest of my night thinking about Adonai Kryze, I think, and what his reign and that whole Kryze family dynamic on Mandalore looked like. That's just... I want more information on that, and I can't wait to maybe get some one day. Yeah. And I'm also thinking about what if bo-katan and the armor talk.
I'm just thinking about how those speeders in the first kind of opening shot and sequence.
Who won?
Well, they kind of look like swoop bikes. It seems like swoop racing, more like pod racing or something like that.
So this is actually not a lot of people know this, but Dave Filoni did let me know that Toro Calican is actually still alive, and he is racing in the Boonta Eve Classic.
Did he win, or did he die?
He came in. He died again.
Great.
All
right. Well, I think we probably better get off of here before we lose our minds, right?
Yes.
But this has been super fun, amazing episode this week. This season is really just rocking and rolling, and that's a fun place to be. So yeah, look for a voicemail episode very soon. And then patrons, you'll get a bonus voicemail episode. Check out the Patreon if you're interested in getting all that bonus content and getting the Discord access. We got a really fun community over there. Do all that stuff. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. That helps other people get involved in our conversation and everything like that. We'll see you again real soon. But until then, keep the watch.